The question, I want to start off with a question. I want to ask you, what is America's motto? And I know the way I said that word probably sounds weird. You guys say motto, right? Is that what it is? Motto? All right, I'm going to try to adjust my Canadian self here, but what is America's motto? In God we trust. Somebody shout that out. Was that you, Doug? All right, yeah. So it's been, believe it or not, a topic of controversy for a lot of years and disagreement by many. Some answer that question with that well-known phrase, in God we trust, right? And for good reason, because every time you take out $1 out of your wallet and you look at that dollar, there's that reminder on it, in God we trust, that we don't put the hope that we have, we don't put our confidence in the money that we hold in our hand, we put our hope in the God who allows us and gives it and provides for us. In God we trust. Some would say that's the motto of this country. Others would contend that America's motto is not in God we trust. America's motto is E pluribus unum. All right? For our Latin experts out there, does anybody know what E pluribus unum stands for? Anybody? Just shout it out. Yes, that is correct. Out of one, many. Yeah, that's it. And for a lot of people, they would say that's America's motto. And it stemmed from the fact that in this country, this cohesive, united country was formed as a result of 13 smaller colonies, right? Out of many, one. It's not a bad motto for a country. It's also not a bad motto for a church. When you think about it, that's, in a way, Ephesians 4 in a nutshell. Paul reminds the people that are reading his letter that this church is comprised of a wide variety of people with diverse abilities and personalities, and they all come together to make up Christ's one worldwide church. So unity, when you think about it, unity is not the opposite of diversity. That's not how it works. Unity in its most beautiful form is filled with diversity. My families, your families are an example of that, right? In our family, because we've got a lot of adopted kids, we have our Caucasians, we have our Asians, we have our Latinos, we have it all. We got it covered. We are the United Nations under one roof. But when we think about it, we look at our kids, we have like giants like Soleil, who's 6'1". She thinks she's 6'2". She thinks she's going to pass me. She will not. We have smaller people like Mac or Luna, who's home today. We have athletes, like volleyball players. We have mathletes who are great, at that. We have boisterous kids that walk into a room and it just becomes loud. And then we have other kids where we have to actually see them to notice that they're in the room. We have blue-eyed kids, brown-eyed kids. We have kids who love to read, others that can't stand books. We have brave, risk-taking kids. I've got a 7-year-old who I'm convinced when she's an adult will be wearing floaties in the swimming pool. Like, we are a hodgepodge collection of people, but we're all one family, right? And so is the church. Will you pray with me? Father, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Ephesians chapter 4, if you have your Bibles, and we're going to start at verse 1. And this morning, we're not even going to put it on the screen. We're just going to listen to this together. I'm going to read through all 16 verses. Paul writes this, verse 1, "As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient. Bear with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body, one Spirit. Just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But to each of us," verse 7, "grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. That is why it says, when he ascended on high, he led captives in his train and gave gifts to men." What does he ascended mean? Except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions. He who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe. I love this. It was he who gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors or teachers, to prepare God's people for works of service, so that the body of Christ might be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. There will no longer be infants. Then, rather, we will no longer be infants tossed and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of men and their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into him who is the head, that is Christ. From him the whole body, joined together and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as every part does its work. May God bless the reading of his word. And I know, there's a lot in there. Last week in Ephesians 3, I took a smaller chunk. We were able to just kind of walk through that verse by verse together. I'm not going to do that today because if we just kind of try to cover every little thing in there, you're going to feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, so to speak. So I've broken today's text down into 4 points that I believe capture the essence of what Paul's saying in these verses that we just read. And so if you're taking notes, 4 foundations of Christian unity. 4 foundations of Christian unity. And the first is this. There is one head. There is one head. Verse 6 says this, there's one God and Father of all who is over all and through all and in all. And in case we missed it, verse 16 says, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. So, Christ, is the head of the church. Not the pastor, not the elders, not the voting members. Christ is the head of the church. There's one head. And he is both the reason and the source of unity. He's why the church is one. You see, Christian unity doesn't happen when every Christian believes the exact same thing and worships the exact same way. No. Our unity is found in the triune God who is 3 persons, one being. Our unity is found in the God that we worship. God's people can be diverse in their beliefs to a degree and their practices in worship, yet make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit because the God whom we worship is one. So he is the head, right? And because he's the head, he is the ultimate provider, the ultimate protector, the ultimate decision maker. He is the authority over the church. I grew up in a house knowing my father was the head of the house. I knew it. There was no questioning that. There was no objecting to that. There was no, you went along with it, right? It was an undisputable fact. He ruled the roost. So he was the protector. I remember years ago, I was just a little kid because I think I may have been 9 or 10 at the time. And my uncle Blaze had been engaged to his beautiful fiancée, Monica, and they were getting married in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, so we took the trip as a family, and we went to go celebrate their wedding. Uncle Gerard, who was my mom's other brother, one of her other brothers, she had 3 brothers, was an alcoholic, and when he drank, things got out of control. When he wasn't drinking, was a really cool guy to be around, but man, when he drank, there were a lot of problems between him and his brothers, and so they decided, because of some of the tension there, that they were not going to ask him to sit at the head table with the rest of the family at the reception. And Uncle Gerard was so upset about this that the family and all of the friends, rather than people get married and you give wedding gifts, rather than everybody kind of bring their own gift and do the registry thing, they all chipped in and they bought a brand new, I think it was like a Trans Am, beautiful red Trans Am, as the wedding gift so that Blaze and Monica would have a car. And that was their wedding gift from everybody, right? So that was the present. Gerard was so upset that he wasn't invited to sit at the head table that he went and set fire to the car and then came after my grandmother. My father whisked us all away, put grandma in the car, drove to a hotel someplace, made most of the kids and my grandmother and my mom go into the bathroom. And I remember that night ducking behind a hotel bed and watching my father behind the door of the hotel, just in case Uncle Gerard would come busting in, standing behind there with a baseball bat. He was the protector. And he would do whatever it takes to protect his family. My father was also the provider. He worked 6 days a week. He would get up before the sun got up, and he would work hard. On Saturdays, he would come home early to spend time with the kids, but he served and he worked to put money or to put food on our plates. He was the provider. And he was the decision maker. I know this because there are things that my mom would say that remind me of this to this day. I still get chills when I would hear, "You just wait till your father gets home," right? That's when we know we had crossed a line we shouldn't have crossed, but then he would kind of dole out the punishment. He was the decision maker, and he was the authority. So if he made a decision and we were like, "Hey, but," he would say, because I told you so, right? Like it was his way or the highway. So my father was head of the household. In a way, those things apply to the church. They don't apply to the pastor, right? He is the protector. He is. So one of the scariest verses of the Bible to me is when Jesus told his followers that if anyone would cause one of these little kids of mine, if anyone caused one of them to sin, it would be better for that person to get into a boat and to go out into the Potomac and somebody tie a boulder around their head and throw them over. That result for them would be better than what will happen if you cause one of my little ones to sin. Like he is the protector of the church, and he's the provider, right? We read in Scripture that he gifts us with abilities, and he gifts us with resource to be able to serve the church and grow his kingdom, and he provides for our needs. He is the provider. He's also the decision maker. It's why we pray. Right? If anyone lacks wisdom, James said, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. It will be given to him. He is the authority. Matthew 28:18. Jesus said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." It's his way or the highway, so it's his church, not ours. It's his church, not ours. It's why, we don't have to stress out no matter what happens. The church will prevail. Growing up on PEI, right, the small little island in Canada, I used to love to go to the beach, and I used to love to build sand castles on the beach. We've all done that. And the sand would be a little bit wet at times, which was perfect because it just had a little bit of moisture in it. Man, you could build these really cool structures. And so I loved just to go and build these sand castles, and it was great, and it was fun, except every once in a while, there'd be older kids that would be walking along the beach, and they thought the fun thing to do was to walk around and kick down the sand castles that little kids had built. They always thought that was cool, right? Today, there was just today they call that bullying. Back then, it was just the privilege of being older. And so I remember one day seeing them on the beach. I'm like, not today. And so I went over to where the cliffs were off to the side, and I grabbed some big old rocks. And I built my sand castles around those rocks. And then I remember just walking away and seeing what they were going to do. And sure enough, they come over, right? And boom, go to kick the castle down. The last time dude was messing with my castles. It was such a joy to think they could no longer destroy what I had built. I hear people all the time that are paranoid and they're worried that the church in this country is dying because of moral decay and political corruption and heresies or just plain old sin. What they're forgetting as they evaluate the situation is this. Our church is built, Matthew 16:16, on a rock. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Try to kick it down all you like, you're going to fail. Because he is the protector. He's the head of the church. But that's not all. There is one head, yes. There's also one body. Verse 4 says this in the text. There is one body and one spirit, just as you were called to one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism when you were called. And that's not all. Verse 12 says this, to equip his people for works of service so that the body may be built up. And in case we missed it, Paul adds in verse 16, from him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up. There is one body. Okay, now it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look around the world we live in and go, I don't know, man, there sure are a lot of churches. Yep, there are. But there's only one church. For years, I hated, as a young pastor, going to these retreats and conferences, not because they weren't valuable. There was a part of it I liked, but it was the conversation sometimes that pastors would have together. I'd be at break time, and I'd go over between sessions, and I'd be getting coffee and a drink or donuts, and I'd have a pastor walk up and introduce himself and say, hey, tell me about your church. How big is it? How many people go there? How many people do you have on staff? And all those kind of questions. And then I would answer, and then he would share his church stats with me. And I always just got a little bit uncomfortable because normally in life I'm all about a competition. But when it comes to the church, it's not competition we're after. It's cooperation because there's only one body. But there's something about us. I don't know what it is. Even like kids. I'm at school having lunch with Salsa a few weeks ago. And we're at the table and friends are there. She's telling her friends at the table what I do, and I'm a pastor, and they're like, wow, yeah, I work at a church. And one of the little kids goes, yeah, well, I go to and name some other church, and Salsa goes, my papa's church is better than yours. Like, what? You're 7. Like, why already? Like, there's something about, I don't know what it is. And it took me a while growing up to grasp this, because we have sliced the body of Christ up into so many pieces. But it's got to be a little bit confusing to a lost world, right? We have Anglican and Catholic and Baptist and Methodist and Presbyterian and Assemblies of God and Lutheran and Pentecostal, and most experts believe there's around 34,000 denominations across the world. Like, I think if there's one thing that grieves Jesus more than anything else when it comes to the church, it's this. Because in John 17, when Jesus prayed for the church that would exist long after he was gone and went back to heaven, like that would exist, hundreds of years later and thousands of years later, when he prayed for that church, you know what he prayed in John 17? He prayed that they would be one. John 17:21, I pray that they would be one. Like one in heart, one in mind, one in purpose, one in name, one in identity. I pray that they will be one, but there was a reason attached to that. It was so that people would believe, God, that I came from you. I pray they will be one. And while you and I can't go back and undo all of the events that transpired in history that has led to division and denominations, we can do a couple of things. One, we can cooperate, right? The reason Jesus prayed that the church is one is so that people would come to know him and believe him. And we can still accomplish that. We can work together with other churches to accomplish the mission of the church. Because there is one church. I'm so excited because what I think Scott announced it earlier, that on Saturday night at 6:30, Kettle Run High School, his church united. Justin Hamaker has organized this corporate worship service where churches from all over this area are going to get together for a time of worship and teaching in Scripture. And we want you to come and invite friends and plug in and just be and enjoy being a part of his church. There's only one church. Growing up in my home church, that wasn't the case. It just wasn't. They were closed-minded. They were territorial. Like, it was almost as if they saw themselves as the gatekeepers of grace. Like, they get to decide who gets in and who doesn't. Like, this is how bad it was. I remember when I was a kid getting invited, because my parents had just started, they'd come to Christ and they just started attending the church. And so early on in their Christian walk, they actually believed this. They've since come out of that way of thinking, and they've changed a little bit. But I remember one time I ran to my father's in middle school. I was like, hey, my friend goes to a Baptist church, and they're having a youth event, and they're going to do all kinds of cool things, and he wants to know if I would go with them. And I asked my father, he's like, no, you can't go to that. They're not Christians. But that's the way the church thought. If you don't go to our church and a part of this denomination and believe exactly like, I once heard that the 2 most popular questions in heaven, you know what they're going to be? 2 most popular questions in heaven are going to be this: where is so-and-so? Or like, what are you doing here? Those are going to probably be the 2 most popular questions in heaven. But listen, that's not what we do. When another church is growing, they may do things a little bit differently than we do them. And God's blessing it, even if they have some different beliefs when it comes to certain things. I'm cheering them on. I'm praying that God would bless them even more and increase their reach and increase their influence, because when it comes down to it, I belong to the same church they do. There's only one body, and it's his body because he is the head. So I don't get to decide, is that church in, is that church out? That's his job. And by the way, Revelation, you read the first 2 chapters, if he looks at a church and decides, and he wants to snuff it out, he will. I believe it was Rupertus Meldenius that famously said this: in essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; and in all things, love. In essentials, unity, like God created us. We sinned, we messed that up. And we're separated because of our sin from God, but God, because of his love for us, found a way, and he sent his son Jesus to die for us, and through that invited us into a relationship with him. And if we surrender our life to Jesus, we're back in relationship with God, and we get to be with him forever. Friends, listen, we don't compromise on that. Because without that core truth, that isn't body, that isn't church, that's nothing at all. So yeah, in essentials, unity, but in non-essentials, liberty. You may have a different belief about end times than I do. Some of you growing up in the church, there's been this debate that's gone on for years about once saved, always saved. Like, can you lose your salvation? Like, can you walk away from it? And there's one side of the debate that says, no, like once you surrender your life to Christ, there's nothing you can do to forfeit that. You can never make the decision to choose to no longer. And then there's another side of that where people believe, no, you can intentionally, willfully choose to walk away from your faith in God. And people have argued back and forth, and listen, it's an important dialogue. It's a great conversation to have. If one person's on one side of that and one person's on the other side of that, does that disqualify them from being a Christian? No. In essentials, unity. There's things we don't compromise on ever. In non-essentials, liberty. But the thing that holds it all together is this. In all things, love. Love. It's the core ingredient of the body, right? So there is one head and there is one body, but there are many parts. There's one body, true. But this one body with one head is comprised of a bunch of different things. Verse 11, it says, it was he who gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers. Verse 16, from him the whole body joined and held together by every supporting ligament grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. One body, many parts. It's one of the great lessons that you can learn from being a part of a sports team. All right, so you don't have to be a part of a sports team. This works in a lot of areas of life. For me, it was sports that taught me this. I didn't get a lot of minutes my freshman year of college because there were a lot of better players than me. But every once in a while, at the end of a half, if somebody was in foul trouble or coach didn't want somebody to get in foul trouble, he would put me in. By the way, anytime I would get minutes my freshman year, it always felt like I just found new and creative ways to disappoint my coach. We were playing, I think it was Shawnee State University. And sure enough, somebody got in foul trouble, and coach said, Rancourt! So I get up off, I run over, like, yeah, I'm going in, coach. He said, there wasn't that much time left. He said, listen, here's our out of bounds play. You're going to go in there. We're going to run stack, and if you slip open and they pass you the ball, here's what I want you to do. John Stacy is our point guard. He was probably about this big. He had some handles, like he could cry. He never turned the ball over. He didn't shoot that much. He was a true point guard. He said, if you get the ball, get it to Stacy. He'll get it down the court, and we'll get into our offense. I'm like, got it, coach, right? So we run our stack out of bounds play. I get the ball, and it's in my hand, and I see John Stacy coming towards me, right? But I'm like, who needs Stacy when they got me, brah? Right? So I start dribbling down the court. I'm like, I'm first team, all me. And so I'm like, I'm going to cross over, make a move, and when I cross over, two guys converge. They hit the ball out of my hand, go down the other side and score. And I'm like, oh no. Sure enough, like halftime, right? We all huddle up in the locker room, and coach is looking around the circle, and he just decides to give the whole speech to me. And he's staring at me. You know what he says? He says, I don't need 5 point guards out there. He said, that's not what I need. I need 1 point guard out there. I need a center. I need a power forward. I need a small forward. I need a shooting guard. This is what I need. I need, when you're out there on the court, guys, if we're going to be great, if we're going to accomplish anything at all, I need each one of you doing your job. It's not your job to do somebody else's thing. And if that's what we're trying to do, you're only going to mess things up. But we can be special. And he went around, you do your job, and you do your job, and you do your job. I felt about this big, but I never forgot it. Listen, there's one church, but many parts, because it's filled with diverse people with different gifts and different abilities that God has given them, different ways of thinking about things, different weird personalities. It's what makes the church function. I stay away from money matters in the church. Do you know why? Because if I messed with the money, the IRS would get us. We wouldn't be able to pay bills. We would go under. So I don't mess with that. We've got people that are gifted and great at that. They do that. And I'm not on stage leading worship. Why? Please don't answer. But the truth is, it's because we want people to attend. And listen, everyone uses their gifts and abilities and talents. That's when the body is healthy and the body grows. It's how it's supposed to be. I had a conversation a while back, like a month or so ago, with someone in our church. And it was after the worship service, we were talking, and the person said to me, you know what? I think I'm ready. I want to plug in and find a place to serve. And they asked, they said, where do you think the church needs me most? What is the greatest need of the church I can plug in and serve? I said, whoa, we got a lot of needs. You know, I said, like, we have a children's ministry that's always looking for committed people to come in and sit with our kids and teach them about who Jesus is and why he loves them. So that would be a great ministry. We have a youth ministry that could use volunteers to pour into our students' lives. We have greeters and check-in people, and we have all kinds of things. But the question I have for you is this: what has God designed you to do? Because when everyone does what they're designed to do in the way, and they plug in as God has equipped them to plug in, oh, this place could be special. This place could be special. So what are you designed by God to do? Because we have a lot of needs. But the one thing we don't need is you sitting on the sidelines. It's time to get in. When we all plug into the body and serve under the one head who is Christ, listen, because we're all so different, when we all do that, because we're so different, it is a beautiful thing. However, because we're all so different, it can be a difficult thing. Early on in the text, Paul says this: be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. You see, part of maintaining unity in the body of Christ that's under one head, that has many parts, is bearing with each other. Like putting up with each other. Because being a part of a group that think and act differently and do weird things and think in weird ways, as helpful as it is, it can cause hurt along the way. And what Paul's saying is for this to work, for this whole church deal to work, for this to make sense and for this thing to be healthy, it's going to take patience and forgiveness and biting your tongue and giving people the benefit of the doubt. And it's going to be about considering other people better than yourself. Anything short of that, it's going to fail. Every wedding, every time I get married, every time I do a wedding, every time I get married, I'm pretty sure, because this is funny, I did their wedding twice, so you can ask them that question. I'm pretty sure I told the story. I tell the same story every time I do a wedding. I don't know if I told the same one the second time I did your wedding. I'm going to have to go back. You're like, not, you're shaking your head no. But you guys are going to remember. But when Emily and I, very early on in our relationship, she was pregnant with Dryden. She was 9 months pregnant, almost 9 months, 8.5 months pregnant, and she was still working at the Prince William County Police as a crime scene investigator. And so I'm up in our apartment in Battery Heights, 4th floor, and because I didn't have a working visa yet, like I was useless, and it was amazing. I could just hang out all day and play video games, go to the gym and do my thing. Like I am praying for God to restore me to the glory days of my past and just sponge off my wife. Oh, do I miss those days? So she's 8.5 months pregnant, and she's working one night, and those people know me, know that I love to give people nicknames. Just love it. Like I see somebody, and once I give them the nickname, it's there. So I was like waiting for Emily to come home one night. She's working, I think, the shift that gets her home like at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, and all of a sudden the perfect nickname just pops into my head for my wife. And I'm like, oh, I'm so excited. I can't wait for her to get in. So I'm like waiting in bemused anticipation. Finally, the door of our apartment swings wide open. She walks in and says, hey, good evening. And I'm like, hi, I love you, FedEx. And she looks at me and she erupts into tears and runs down the hallway and slams the bedroom door. And I'm looking at her going like, what a jerk, right? So I go down the hall and I open the bedroom door. I'm like, sweetheart, why are you crying? And she says, you called me FedEx. You think I'm as big as a truck? And I'm like, oh no, that's what you received. No, I was what I meant is one day soon you're going to deliver her, right? Completely missed it. Caused her pain. But the reason why, you guys remember that story? The reason why I tell that at weddings is this, because then I'll turn to the couple and I'll look them in the eyes. I'm going to say this, guess what? You're going to hurt each other. You are. And sometimes it's going to be accidental like it was with my wife that day. And other times you're going to say and you're going to do things that while you're doing them, you know the effect that's going to have. You know that's going to be a wound for them, but sometimes we do it anyways. You're going to let each other down. You're going to do things that drive each other crazy. The promise that you're making today as you become one is not that you're never going to hurt each other or let each other down. You will. It's that you will bear with one another and forgive each other no matter the offense. Being one is possible. It is. But as different as you are, as different as we are, it's going to take that. It applies to marriage. It applies to life in the church. Because we're one body, under one head, which is Christ. We're all kinds of different people, weird people with different ways of thinking. All right? But the good news is, we're not all of this for no reason at all. Like there's actually a purpose, Paul says, into us being this one body under one head with all these different parts that can be beautiful and difficult at the same time, and it's because there is one goal. So what's the goal of all of this? Paul's clear in verse 12. He said, to equip his people for works of service, so the body will be built up, the body of Christ built up until we reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. That's the goal. Equip everyone to do their part so Christ is magnified, so the body of Christ then is together and growing and reaching the world, and everyone's experiencing Christ in different ways. And in other words, the goal of unity is so that everyone will know Jesus and experience him daily to the max. That's what we're after here. So let me ask you this. How can you know when things are going well at a church? It's a great question, right? Unexpectedly, driving home from youth group last week, we're in the car, and Lily's in the riding shotgun up front, and she says to me, hey, Papa, how would you rate our church? And the question caught me off guard because I'd never had that question before, much less from my middle school kid. I'm like fumbling and bumbling through the answer because I'm just surprised by the question. It was a great question. I'm like, wow, thank you for that. But how do you know if things are going well at a church? The answer is not what you think, probably. It's not attendance. And don't get me wrong, I want people to attend. Attending is a core value. Hebrews 10:25 says, do not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let's kind of gather together. All the more as you see the days approaching, it's a core value for us. And I'm not afraid of numbers. You read the book of Acts, and they're recording numbers, like this amount of people were baptized this day, and this amount of people were a part of the church now. And I'm not afraid of numbers, but attendance is not how you know a church is healthy or doing or going well. It's not that, and it's not giving. Don't get me wrong, giving is essential. We are commanded to give, right? And so we don't take that lightly. God says we need to give of our resources, and we need what happens to us when we give. And in order for the kingdom and for this church to do its work, we have to give. And if you're not giving, that's something you need to think about, and we need to get serious about because it's important. We're commanded to, but as a church, you can be rich financially. You can have money in the bank, all your bills paid for years, and be spiritually bankrupt, so to speak. It's not just giving. And it's not how great worship is and how polished and air-free. And my goodness, they hit every note and their transitions are so smooth. And man, that sermon, that was super funny. It's none of those things. When someone says, how can you tell things are going well at your church? I can answer yes or no based on one thing typically. Are people falling in love with Jesus and experiencing him daily? That's it. In other words, am I seeing transformation? Am I seeing transformation? And as long as I've been a pastor, when I see things or I have people come up to me and share stories about this thing that this person did for Jesus, and man, you'll never believe what happened with this person, and man, people are growing and experiencing Jesus. Man, I know the body's healthy. When I can go for weeks or months and the stories are few and far between, I'm like, oh, you know what? We probably have a problem here. Transformation is what we're after. In one of the Peanuts specials, right, Linus is reclining on the floor and he's watching television, and Lucy the Bull marches in and says, "Change the channel right now." Right? To which so Linus is like, wait, I was here first. And to which Lucy holds up her hands and says, "You see these 5 fingers? You see these 5 fingers, Linus, alone, they're nothing. But when I curl them into a fist, they become a terrible weapon that is something to behold," right? So Linus does what he do. He gets up and changes the channel. And the next thing you see is Lucy is laying down, reclining, and watching her show, and Linus is off to the side. He's just like looking at his hand. He's going like, looking at his fingers, going like, why? Why can't you guys get together like that? Why can't you guys get together like that? It's kind of what Paul's talking about here, right? For us to be that kind of church, it takes him as the head. And us understanding his authority and seeking God in all things and understanding that we are one body, right? We plug into his worldwide church, his body, and we get together and we pray for the church to accomplish the mission because, and how do we get there? Man, one body, many parts. We all plug in and we do our part, and sometimes that means plugging in with my gifts and the resources and the abilities that God gave me, and sometimes that means bearing with somebody else that might drive me crazy, and we do it for one reason, so the body of Christ will be lifted up, and we're all growing and becoming mature, attaining to the fullness of Christ together, right? Will you pray with me? Father, we thank you that you didn't leave us alone to have to figure out what it means to be a part of your body, that you left instructions, that you inspired people like Paul to be able to share. And he didn't even know at the time that what he's writing would eventually become scripture that would be read in churches across the world for thousands of years. Like, he had no idea, Father, but you used him. And so, Father, my prayer is this, that you will use us. I thank you that you've gifted us. I thank you that you've called us. I thank you that you are ready to move us, Father, and our heart is to move and to be a part of what you're doing. I thank you for your church in Jesus' name. Amen.